Hello, welcome to Dreamy On. My name is Andrew. Tonight, I'll be keeping you company as you drift toward the edge of sleep. There's no rush here. There's nothing you need to do. You don't have to follow every word. You can simply listen or let the words pass by like gentle waves. Now, notice where your body is resting. Allow your weight to settle. Feel the surface beneath you, holding you effortlessly, without any effort from you at all. Bring your attention to your breath. Slowly breathe in through your nose, and as you breathe out, allow your body to soften just a little more. You're not listening to this story to stay awake. If you fall asleep, that's exactly how it's meant to be. When your mind begins to rest, the story has done its job. Tonight, I'll take you inside an old lighthouse, standing quietly by the sea, a place where time slows, where the light is not a duty, but a silent watch. This is the lighthouse keeper's memories. Not only the story of a man, but the story of a light, a silence, and remembering. Whenever you're ready, you may gently close your eyes, and as the lighthouse beam begins its slow, steady turn, you can allow yourself to drift calmly, peacefully, into sleep. That night, the sea was quieter than it had ever been, and that was what made it frightening. As the old man climbed the narrow stairs of the lighthouse tower, the lantern in his hand trembled slightly. For 40 years, every single night, he had climbed the same steps and lit the same light. But tonight, something was different. The air was still. The waves touched the shore so softly they seemed to whisper. And that silence stirred an unease in his experienced heart. When he reached the top of the lighthouse, he stopped before the great lens. He placed his hands against the glass, cold as it always was. Outside, moonlight traced a silver road across the sea. Far away, the horizon was pitch black. No ship lights, no stars, only endless darkness, pierced by the rotating beam of light. The old man reached into his pocket and took out a small, worn notebook. Its leather cover was old, its pages yellowed and wrinkled by salt air. For 40 years, he had written something in this notebook every night. Sometimes about storms that rattled the tower's windows. Sometimes about ships passing in the distance. Sometimes about his own wandering thoughts as the hours stretched toward dawn. He opened the notebook to tonight's blank page, fountain pen ready in his other hand, its tip catching the light. Then he stopped. Something was wrong. The page before it, yesterday's page, was not written in his handwriting. The letters were thin, slanted, written in a style he had never seen before. The ink looked fresh, despite being a day old. And the words described an event he had never lived through, a night he could not remember. November 3rd, 1891. A three-masted schooner approached from the northeast at 2:47 a.m. I signaled with the lamp, but received no response. The ship passed silently, cutting through the fog like a ghost. The entire crew stood motionless on deck, staring at the lighthouse, their eyes like stone, glass, and flesh all at once. I have never felt such cold, not even in the worst winter storms. It came from within, deeper than bone. The old man's hands began to shake, and the notebook nearly slipped from his grasp. Yesterday was November 3rd, 1891. Of that, he was certain. He marked the date carefully every day in the official logbook, as he always had. But he had written nothing about a schooner in his personal journal. Last night had been calm, completely calm. No ships had passed within sight. He remembered it clearly. He had sat in his chair until dawn, listening to the waves, smoking his pipe, watching the beam of light complete its endless rotations. And yet here it was, in his own notebook, in the private journal no one else could touch, locked in the drawer of his desk whenever he wasn't writing in it, written by a hand that was not his. With numb, clumsy fingers, he flipped through the earlier pages. His own handwriting, his own words, everything normal. Weather observations, notes on passing ships, maintenance reminders. But when he returned to yesterday's page, those strange letters were still there, as if mocking him, daring him to explain their presence. The lighthouse beam continued its slow rotation, illuminating the dark waters every 12 seconds. The old man felt the rhythm in his bones. He had lived with it so long that his heartbeat seemed synchronized to it. 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of shadow, again and again, night after night, year after year, decade after decade. It was the metronome of his existence, the steady pulse that had organized his life since the day he first arrived on this lonely headland. He closed the notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. The leather was warm from his body heat. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps his eyes were playing tricks on him, finding patterns where none existed. At 73, such things could happen. He had been alone in this lighthouse for so long that sometimes memory and reality blurred together like watercolor on wet paper, their edges soft and uncertain. But deep down, beneath rationalization and denial, he knew this was different. This was real. The wind began to rise, softly at first, then with growing force. It whistled through the iron railings of the lighthouse gallery, producing a low, mournful sound, like a voice singing in a language he almost, but not quite, understood. The old man walked to the window and looked out at the sea. The waves were growing now, their white crests visible even in the darkness, catching both the moonlight and the rotating beam of the lighthouse. And then he saw it, a ship. It emerged from the fog like a specter, its 3 masts rising into the night sky like skeletal fingers. A schooner approaching from the northeast, just as the mysterious entry had described. His breath caught in his throat. His heart stumbled in his chest. With suddenly icy hands, he grabbed the signal lamp and began flashing the warning code. Rocks lay ahead, dangerous shoals that had claimed countless ships over the decades, unforgiving stone that shattered hulls without mercy. The code was simple and urgent. Danger, danger, change course, rocks ahead. The ship did not respond. It moved through the water with an unnatural smoothness, continuing its silent, relentless approach. Through the telescope mounted by the window, he could make out figures on the deck. They stood in a line along the railing, completely motionless, their forms dark against the pale wood. They were all staring at the lighthouse. Even at that distance, even through the darkness broken only by the rotating beam, he could feel their eyes on him. Cold eyes, empty eyes, eyes that saw but did not live. The ship passed within 100 meters of the rocks, close enough for him to see the peeling paint along its hull, hanging in long strips that should have been repaired months ago. Yet it made no sound, no creaking wood, no snapping canvas, no voices of a working crew, only silence, deep and unnatural, swallowing even the sound of wind and waves. Then it was gone, just as suddenly as it had appeared. It was swallowed by the fog, like a projection cast onto mist, a shadow play performed for an audience of one. The old man stood frozen at his post, the signal lamp hanging loosely from his hand, forgotten. His entire body was cold, as if submerged in ice water, as if the temperature had dropped 30 degrees in a single heartbeat. He knew, beyond logic, beyond reason, that what he had just witnessed was the exact event described in the mysterious entry. But how? How could someone write about an event that had not yet occurred? How could words exist that described a scene before it had been played out? And who could have written them? There was only him in this lighthouse. The supply ship came once a month, bringing food, oil, and mail from the mainland, and it had been here just 3 days ago. He had spoken with the 2 men who crewed it, helped unload the supplies, watched them sail away into the afternoon sun. No one else had been here. No one else had access to his private quarters. No one else could reach the notebook he kept locked in his desk drawer when he wasn't writing in it. Unless a thought occurred to him, so strange, so unsettling, that he almost laughed. The sound died in his throat before it could escape, strangled by the icy sensation still wrapped around his body. What if the handwriting was his? What if he had written the entry himself and simply didn't remember? What if, in some state of consciousness he could not explain or recall, he had recorded an event that had not yet happened? He had heard of such things. Sleepwalking, talking in one's sleep, actions performed in fugue or trance states. But this was different. This was detailed, specific, accurate. This was prophecy written in ink. What kind of force could enter his locked room, open the drawer, take out his notebook, and write in his place? Or worse, what kind of force was writing from inside him? The moment the thought echoed through his mind, the stone walls of the lighthouse seemed to draw a little closer. The air in the room grew heavy, Breathing became difficult, as if the air filling his lungs was no longer cold but damp earth. The lamp's light was still rotating, but it no longer felt as though it was simply illuminating. The moving beam no longer cut through the darkness. It shaped it, molded it, shifting something within the shadows with every pass. The old man lowered himself slowly into his chair. His knees ached. His bones felt as though they could not bear the weight of this night. He placed the notebook on his knees, opened the cover, and for a long moment simply stared at it. The pages had softened from years of salt air. The paper felt almost alive beneath his fingers, absorbing their warmth and giving it back. For a brief instant, his mind drifted not 40 years back, but further still, to his first night. It had been autumn of 1851. The lighthouse had been unfamiliar then, the walls too thick, the stairs too narrow. He had not slept that first night, jolting awake at every sound of wind. Watching the light rotate, he had whispered to himself, "This is just a machine. Stone, glass, and gears." But that night, too, there had been silence. Strange, deep, pressing, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Now, 40 years later, the same silence had returned. The old man picked up his pen. The moment the nib touched the paper, the trembling in his hand eased. Writing still anchored him to the world. If he stopped writing, it felt as though everything would unravel. He turned to a new page. November 4th, 1891, he wrote. He paused, then continued. Tonight, I found an entry in my notebook that does not belong to me. The handwriting resembles mine, but it is not mine. The events described were written down before I experienced them, or so I believed. The pen stopped. A sound came from outside. It was not the wind. It was not the waves. The sound of water striking stone had long ago claimed its own place in his memory. This sound was different, measured, intentional. A footstep inside the lighthouse. The old man raised his head. He looked toward the door that opened onto the stairwell. The door was closed, locked, but the sound came again. Another step, slow, deliberate, heavy. 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of shadow. Another step, exactly during the moment of shadow. His heart slammed against his chest. He tried to stand, but his legs refused to obey. His fingers tightened around the edge of the notebook. He tried to count his own heartbeats, but they collided with the lighthouse's rhythm. He could no longer tell which was which. Whatever was climbing the stairs was not in a hurry. It moved as if it knew time belonged to it. Another step. The old man whispered, "Who's there?" His voice did not echo. The stone seemed to swallow it whole. No answer came. The footsteps stopped. A long silence followed, so long that the old man began to convince himself it had all been an illusion. Perhaps what he had written, what he had read, was only a trick of his mind. And just as he clung to that thought, he heard breathing behind the door. Not the breathing of a person, deeper, slower, as if the entire lighthouse itself were breathing. Then the pages of the notebook stirred on their own. When the old man looked down, he saw the page, empty only moments before, beginning to fill. Ink spread across the paper without a pen touching it. The letters resembled his handwriting, but this time they were rushed. "Do not open the door." Cold poured down his spine. "If you open it this time, the light will not return." The old man slammed the notebook shut, as if that could stop the writing. But the feeling remained, that the words continued to exist beneath the cover. The breathing behind the door ceased. In its place came a whisper, a voice he knew too well. "Have you forgotten me so quickly?" Catherine's voice. His throat locked. His eyes filled, but he could not cry. That voice, its tone, had not sounded this clear even in his dreams. "I'm here," the voice said. "I always have been." The door handle shifted slightly. The old man covered his ears, closed his eyes, collapsed into the chair. "The light does not go out," he murmured. "The light does not go out. The light does not go out." The lighthouse turned. 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of shadow, and the shadow stretched. At first, he thought it was only a trick of the light, the rotating lens, the rain-blurred glass, the fatigue in his eyes. Any of it could have distorted his perception, but the shadow did not obey the places where the light withdrew. It did not follow the curve of the wall, the bend of the stairwell, or the arched frames of the windows. It moved by its own rules, as if the darkness inside the lighthouse no longer waited for the absence of light, but existed on its own. A faint sound came from behind the door. This time, the handle moved more clearly, slowly, carefully, like a hand trying to remember how a door is opened. "Catherine," the old man whispered. His voice came out broken, thick. "This isn't possible." The voice behind the door softened, almost gentle. "You always said that," it replied. "You said it on the last night, too." Something shifted deep in his mind. A locked door creaked open. An image, no, a feeling rose up. A bedroom, curtains drawn, the air heavy with the smell of medicine. Catherine lay in the bed, her face pale, her forehead damp. Their young daughter, and stood frozen in the doorway, watching in fear. And he was kneeling beside the bed, holding Catherine's hand. "Don't leave me," Catherine had said that night. "Please." The old man shook his head, as if trying to scatter the memory. It was real, but it was not here. It was years ago. It did not belong in the lighthouse. "You're dead," he said, trembling. "I buried you." The breathing behind the door stopped. Then came a laugh. It was not Catherine's. "Death," the voice said slowly, weighing the word, "is only a door for those below." A footstep sounded on the stairs. This time, not from above, from below. The old man's eyes slid toward the stairwell. At that exact moment, the light swept across it. For an instant, only an instant, he saw something on the stairs, human-sized, wet, its edges indistinct, as if its body had been kneaded from fog. It had no face, but where a head should have been, the darkness was thicker. The light moved on. The shadow returned. The shape was gone, but the footsteps continued, climbing upward, one step every 12 seconds. The old man opened the notebook again. The pages flipped rapidly, as if invisible fingers were searching. One page stopped on its own. January 12th, 1879. He remembered that day. There had been a storm, a violent one, waves battering the lighthouse windows. Yes, he remembered that. But he did not remember this page. Tonight, the notebook read, in the same unfamiliar yet familiar handwriting. The shadow came up the stairs. The light does not stop it. The light calls it. If I open the door, it will enter. If I do not, it will go back down. I do not know which is worse. The old man held his breath. This had happened before, and he had forgotten. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Silence. Then water began to seep under the door. Not rainwater, salt water. It smelled of the sea. The old man staggered back from his chair. His feet caught on books on the chair legs. He stared at the door as the darkness beneath it spread with the water. The shadow was no longer only on the walls. It moved across the floor. Alive. A knock came at the door. One. Slow. Please, Catherine's voice said again. I'm cold. The old man closed his eyes. His lips moved like someone praying, but no words came. Instead, he began counting the lighthouse's rhythm. 12 seconds of light. 12 seconds of shadow. Another knock. Harder this time. The door shuddered. The notebook fell to the floor. Its pages splayed open. Ink seemed to spill from the pages, flowing onto the ground. Words bled into one another. Dates. Years. All collapsing together. And in that moment, the old man finally understood. The lighthouse did not guide only ships. The light awakened the sea. The fog answered. And the notebook was not a record. It was a warning. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. Silence returned. The footsteps retreated. The water withdrew slowly from the floor, as if it had never been there. The lighthouse continued to turn. 12 seconds of light. 12 seconds of shadow. The old man remained where he had collapsed, gasping for breath. He did not know whether minutes had passed or hours. The rain had stopped. The wind had eased. When dawn broke, everything looked normal. The door was intact. The floor was dry. There were no footprints on the stairs. But the notebook was still open, and on the final page, a new date had been written. November 5th, 1891. Beneath it was a single sentence. Tonight, he will try to turn off the light. The old man stared at the sentence for a long time. His eyes never left the line, yet he no longer saw the words. His mind circled the thought, as if the sentence itself were a center of gravity, pulling everything else into its orbit. Turning off the light. It was something he had never considered in his entire life. To be a lighthouse keeper was to be a keeper of the light. The light had to remain on, always, in storms, in fog, in exhaustion, in illness, even in death. He had always believed that if he died, someone else would come, but the light itself would never go out. Now the notebook was writing his future in his name, in his handwriting, and that future violated the single unbreakable rule of his life. As the sun slowly rose, the lighthouse room filled with a pale gray light. The beacon was still rotating, but it was daytime now. Its presence had become symbolic. The old man stood and walked heavily toward the lamp. He looked into the lens. His reflection stared back at him. Slumped shoulders, a face carved with deep lines, a beard gone completely white. His eyes were no longer the same. There was no longer fatigue in them. There was anticipation. "I will not turn off the light," he said aloud. His voice echoed inside the lighthouse, but it carried stubbornness more than conviction. He closed the notebook, placed it in the drawer, and locked it. He dropped the key into his pocket. Then he went downstairs. He carried out his daily routines, checked the oil drums, inspected the mechanism, prepared a simple meal in the kitchen. Movement helped him avoid thinking. Keeping his hands busy kept his mind away from that sentence. But the sentence did not leave him. In the afternoon, the sea looked calm. The horizon was clear. There was no fog. The sky was a dull blue. Days like this were rare and usually comforting. But there was no comfort in him. Every calm felt like a warning of something approaching. Toward evening, he opened the official lighthouse logbook. He took the pen and stared at the blank page for a while. Then he wrote, November 4th, 1891. Weather clear. Visibility good. No unusual ship activity observed. The lie weighed heavily on him, but writing the truth felt heavier still. When the sun set, the light regained its meaning. The lens turned, and the beam began sweeping the sea once more. The old man sat in his chair. The notebook was locked in the drawer, but he could feel its presence, as if the drawer itself were breathing. Hours passed. 12 seconds of light. 12 seconds of shadow. As midnight approached, the sea fell silent again. This silence was no longer unfamiliar. He recognized it. When the silence came, something always followed. And it did. Fog. At first it was thin, spreading low across the water like a veil. Then it thickened. The horizon vanished. The shoreline disappeared. The lighthouse beam drowned after only a short distance inside the fog. The old man stood. His heart raced, but this time he did not flee. He waited, as if he wanted to confirm what the notebook had written. And then, from within the fog, another shape emerged. This time, it was not a ship. This time, it was a staircase made of stone steps, rising impossibly from the sea. Its top disappeared into the fog. Its base did not touch the water. It hung there, suspended. The old man rubbed his eyes, looked again. The staircase was still there, and at the foot of the stairs stood a figure. Catherine, not as she had aged, not as he had last seen her. She was younger, as she had been when they first met. She was smiling. Her smile was gentle, inviting. "Come," she said. "This time, you're not alone." The old man opened his mouth, but no sound came. His feet moved on their own, one step toward the staircase. Then he stopped. Behind him, the lighthouse beam turned. 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of shadow. And in that moment, he understood. The staircase existed while the light was on. If the light were extinguished, the staircase would not vanish. On the contrary, it would be completed. The sentence from the notebook echoed in his mind. Tonight, he will try to turn off the light. Who? Catherine, the lighthouse, or himself? He took another step, then stopped. He turned back, looked at the lighthouse light, the thing he had protected for 40 years. And for the first time, he reached out his hand toward the lamp's mechanism. When he placed his hand on the cold metal of the mechanism, his entire life condensed into a single sensation. Cold. This was not the cold of night, not the cold of sea wind or the damp drawn into stone walls over decades. This was a deeper cold, a cold that came from time itself. A cold seeping from the gap between remembering and forgetting. His fingers trembled. The mechanism worked as it always had. The gears precise, the weights balanced. The light continued to turn, indifferent to his hesitation, as if the lighthouse had already made its decision and was merely waiting for him to perform the final act. Outside, the fog thickened. The staircase was still there. Catherine was still waiting, but something had changed. Her smile had stiffened, like an expression held for far too long. Her eyes were impatient. "Time is running out," she said, "as it always does." The old man swallowed. His lips were dry. "Always?" he asked. His voice came out hoarse. Catherine tilted her head slightly. That gesture, yes, he remembered it. She always tilted her head that way when she was about to explain something, when she was trying to make someone accept an inevitable truth. "You forget," she said gently. "You always forget." For a moment, the world inside the lighthouse seemed to unravel. The stone walls, the stairs, the body of the lamp. Everything collapsed into overlapping images. He saw himself sitting in the same room, in the same chair, before the same lamp, but at different times. Young, middle-aged, old, sometimes bearded, sometimes clean-shaven. Sometimes his eyes were resolute. Sometimes they were filled with fear. And every time, the notebook was open. Every time, something was written. And every time, the light had gone out. Another memory surfaced. The lighthouse was dark, completely dark. But this darkness was not night. It was dense, heavy, crushing, and within it, the stairs were full. Shadows climbing upward, shadows descending, silent, patient, waiting. Another memory. The light was on again. He was waking in his chair. The notebook lay on the table. He remembered nothing, but the notebook remembered everything. The old man felt his knees give way. Without the mechanism to hold on to, he would have fallen. "This is a cycle," he whispered. I've done this before." Catherine nodded. "You had to," she said. "Every time." "Then why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Why do I have to turn the light off?" Catherine's face darkened. The fog began to consume the edges of her form. "Because the light calls them," she said. "And when it calls them, a price must be paid." From below, from within the sea, a sound rose. Deep, resonant. Many voices joined into a single breath. The old man looked. Beneath the staircase, within the fog, the surface of the water churned. Shapes emerged. Ships. Old ships. Broken hulls. Splintered masts. And on their decks stood figures. Motionless. Watching. "They are the ones," Catherine said. "The ones who followed your light. The ones who found their way by your light. And the ones who remained here because of your light." The old man closed his eyes. He remembered the ships that had struck the rocks, the ones he could not save, the men the light had reached, but the sea had taken, the guilt he had carried, the way he had never forgiven himself. "I was here to save them," he said. "I know," Catherine replied. "And that is exactly why they chose you." When he opened his eyes, Catherine was no longer at the staircase. She was inside the lighthouse, between him and the lamp. Half transparent, like fog given shape, the room grew colder. His breath turned to vapor. "Your hand is there," Catherine said. "Don't let go." "If I turn the light off," the old man said, "will it come back?" Catherine looked at him. This time, there was no softness in her eyes, only truth. "No," she said, "but neither will you." Beside the mechanism was a small lever. For emergencies. To stop the light. A lever he had never touched in his entire life. 12 seconds of light. 12 seconds of shadow. This time, he did not count. He pulled the lever. The light flickered for a moment, as if trying to resist. Then the rotating lens slowed. The beam narrowed. The fog thickened around the lighthouse. And the light went out. Darkness fell. But this time, the darkness was not silent. A scream rose from the sea. The sound of thousands of voices merged into one. The staircase completed itself. The fog split. The shadows moved. The last thing the old man felt was Catherine's hand releasing his. And relief. When morning came, the shore was empty. The lighthouse light was dark. When the supply ship arrived 3 days later, they did not find the keeper. The lighthouse was intact. The mechanism worked. The oil was full. The notebook lay on the table. On the final page, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "November 4th, 1891. The light was extinguished. The sea is calm." And another note, added in the margin, written in older, faded ink. "For the next keeper, do not keep the light on at all times." The lighthouse remained dark for 3 days. Sailors would speak of it later. Fishermen passing close to shore, boats gliding through the fog, cargo ships setting their course in open water. They all noticed the same thing. The familiar light was gone. That steady pulse cutting through the sea every 12 seconds had stopped. But this was the strange part. No one raised an alarm. No ship struck the rocks. No boat ran aground. No wreckage washed ashore. It was as if the sea had accepted the absence of the light. The supply ship appeared on the morning of the fourth day. There was no fog. The sea was unnaturally calm. As they approached the shore, the captain looked at the dark silhouette of the lighthouse and, without thinking, removed his hat. He did not know why. It simply felt right. When they docked, 2 officials went ashore. They climbed the steps, knocked on the door. No answer. They did not force it. They had keys. The lighthouse service always carried spare keys for situations like this. The lock opened easily. The door swung inward without a sound. Inside, everything was orderly. The chairs were in place. The table was clean. The pipe rested at the edge of the desk. There was no ash in it, as if it had never been lit. The oil drums were full. The mechanism was intact. Nothing was broken, but the keeper was gone. They searched every level of the lighthouse. The lower storage rooms, the upper gallery, the stairwells. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of haste, no sign of escape. Only one thing caught their attention: the notebook. It was on the table, not open, but placed as if meant to be seen. One of the men picked it up and flipped through the pages. Weather records, maintenance notes, passing ships. Everything was meticulous. They stopped at the final page. The light was extinguished. The sea is calm. This was not a report. It was an observation. The man closed the notebook. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then one of them asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you think the sea really is calm?" The other did not answer. That night, the lighthouse was lit again. The new keeper was young, 28 years old. When he accepted the post, he did not ask many questions about the disappearance of his predecessor. People along the coast did not like to dwell on such things. The sea took him, they said. Sometimes it does. On his first night, when the young keeper lit the lamp, he noticed how perfectly the mechanism worked. The rotating beams swept across the sea. 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of shadow, and for a moment, something shifted within the darkness. But he blamed it on fatigue. The first nights were calm. The second night as well. On the third night, fog arrived, but it was ordinary fog, the kind that comes with the sea and leaves with it. On the fourth night, he found the notebook, not in the desk drawer, on the table beside his bed. When he picked it up, he noticed the cover was warm, as if someone had just closed it. Instinctively, he flipped through the pages and saw the first entry written in his own handwriting. First night. The light works beautifully. The sea is quiet. The young keeper frowned. He did not remember writing it. But stranger still, beneath it was another line, thinner, more compressed, written in faded ink. You do not remember yet. The young keeper closed the notebook, and outside, within the fog, The lighthouse light continued to turn. The young keeper collapsed into the chair. He noticed his knees trembling, but that did not surprise him. What surprised him was that fear was no longer alone. Beneath it, there was another feeling. Familiar, almost like an old friend. Acceptance. The hum of the lighthouse had changed. It no longer sounded mechanical. It sounded like a rhythmic breath. It came from within the walls, from the stone, the iron, the glass. As if the lighthouse were a living organism, inhaling and exhaling. The young keeper picked up the notebook again. This time, he did not turn away. He flipped through the pages slowly. There were writings from previous keepers. Different handwriting, yet the same words. First night, you do not remember. The light must stay on. The light must not stay on too long. On the corners of some pages, small symbols had been drawn. Circles, crosses. On one page, a staircase had been sketched with a trembling hand. Beside it, a single word was written. Down. The young keeper raised his head. He looked toward the stairwell. The steps descending below vanished into darkness where the light did not reach. That darkness was not ordinary, not like the shadows above. It was denser, heavier, as if something were waiting below. He stood. This was not a decision made by careful thought. It rose from within him, or rather, he was pushed by something rising from within. He placed his hand on the railing. The metal was cold, but familiar. When he stepped onto the first stair, the lighthouse beam completed another rotation above him. The shadow stretched. It flowed downward. With each step, a memory stirred in his mind. He felt he had been here before, that he had counted these steps, that he had stood still in the darkness and listened. One step, another. As he descended, the air changed. The scent of salt grew stronger. The air was damp, and there was something else, an older smell. Wood, rotted rope, wet cloth, the smell of shipwrecks. He stopped when he reached the door below. This door did not appear in the official plans of the lighthouse. None of the coastal officials had mentioned it, and yet here it was. Old, scarred with carved marks. Some of them looked like fingernail scratches. He opened the door. The lower chamber was wide, as if carved directly into the foundation of the lighthouse. The walls were uneven. The stones looked far older than the careful masonry above. And at the center of the room, water, seawater, but not churning. Still, like a pool. The light from above did not reach it, yet a faint glow rose from within the water itself. He stepped closer. On the surface, he saw a reflection. It was not his own. An older man, bearded, his eyes weary but resolute. He held a lighthouse lamp in his hands. The old man spoke from within the water. "You're late." The young keeper dropped to his knees. You, he said. The previous keeper. The old man nodded. One of them, he said, but not the first. The water rippled. The reflection multiplied. Other faces appeared, different ages, different expressions, but all of them looked with the same eyes. "This place," the old man said, "is not where the light begins. It is where the light is bound." "What does that mean?" the young keeper asked. "The sea," said the old man, "remembers everything, what it has taken, what it was never able to return. The light gives it rhythm. But when the rhythm becomes too regular, the sea answers. Shadows moved across the surface. Silhouettes. Ships. People. We," said the old man, "are the balance." The young keeper lifted his head. "I didn't ask for this." A tired smile crossed the old man's face. "None of us did." The water grew calm again. The reflections collapsed back into a single face. "Now it's your turn," the old man said. "You're beginning to remember. That's good. But if you remember too much, the light won't let you go." The young keeper stood and stepped back. "There's no way out of this." Silence. Then the old man answered, "There is." "How?" "By learning the light," he said, "when it must burn and when it must rest." A sound came from above. The lighthouse beam completed another rotation. This time, it did not hesitate. The rhythm settled. 12 seconds of light, 12 seconds of shadow. But now, the young keeper understood. This rhythm was not a rule. It was an agreement. The young keeper climbed the stairs slowly. The dampness of the lower chamber had settled into his bones. As he ascended, the air grew drier, but the cold did not fade. It felt as if the cold now belonged to the lighthouse itself, shared by stone, iron, and memory alike. When he reached the upper level, the lamp was still turning. The rhythm had settled again, but it no longer soothed him. It no longer ticked like a clock, it pulsed like a heartbeat. The lighthouse seemed to be breathing with him. He placed the notebook on the table. He did not lock it. He knew it should not be locked. He turned the pages and, for the first time, read them not as warnings, but as a map. Dates were no longer dates. They were thresholds. Events were no longer events. They were trials. First night, fear. Fourth night, remembering. Seventh night, decision. The seventh night, he checked the calendar. It was the 4th. He moved to the window. The sea was calm, but the calm was deceptive. The surface of the water below felt less like a mirror and more like a door. The longer he looked, the more he sensed that what he was watching was also watching him. "What do you want?" he asked, without lowering his voice. The sea did not answer, but the shadow inside the lighthouse stirred just for a moment. This time it was not on the stairs. It moved beneath the lamp, circling the lens. It brushed the edges of the light, as if measuring its limits. The young keeper understood. Turning the light off completely or leaving it on forever, both were wrong. Someone before him had tried each. The one who extinguished the light had vanished. The one who kept it burning had remained, but not with his body. He opened the notebook and wrote. This time, his hand did not tremble. 4th night. I remember. The light is not a command. It is a negotiation. As the words took shape, the hum of the lighthouse softened. As if it were listening, the young keeper stepped to the mechanism. He examined the settings, the rotation speed, the duration of the beam. He made a change, a very small one, too small for an ordinary person to notice. The light turned. 11 seconds of light, 13 seconds of shadow. A sound rose from the sea. Not a scream this time, more like a sigh, displeased but accepting. The fog stirred, then withdrew. The young keeper held his breath. He waited. Nothing happened. After a while, the shadow retreated from the lamp. The stairwell grew calm. The darkness where the lower door lay was no longer dense. It was ordinary darkness. The young keeper sat down. For the first time, he felt that the chair belonged to him. The lighthouse had recognized him. So had the sea. Near dawn, he opened the notebook again. A new line had appeared. This time the handwriting was his, but not as it once had been, neither trembling nor hurried. Continue the trials until the 7th night. Beneath it, in an older hand, a single word had been added. Live. When the sun rose, the lighthouse was still lit. The sea was calm, truly calm. The young keeper looked out through the window and, for the first time, thought this. He did not have to escape this place. But staying was not a punishment either. This was no longer a duty. It was a watch, and watches were passed on. When the 7th night arrived, the sound of time inside the lighthouse had changed. It was not a ticking nor a hum. It felt more like tension, as if hours were no longer moving forward, but stretching. Minutes elongated. Seconds tangled into one another. The young keeper noticed this while seated in his chair. The notebook rested on his knees. The pen held loosely between his fingers, but he was not writing. He was waiting for the moment when writing would be right. Outside the window, the sea was calm. Too calm. There were no waves, no wind. The surface of the water looked like dark glass reflecting the sky. The moon appeared as a single scratch, like a mark carved into the heavens. The lighthouse beam turned. 11 seconds of light, 13 seconds of shadow. This was his rhythm now, a quiet agreement made with the sea. But agreements, especially silent ones, always demanded renegotiation. The notebook opened on its own. This time the pages did not flip at random. They moved with order, with intention, like a map. The young keeper leaned forward and read. On the 7th night, doors open. On the 7th night, time thins. On the 7th night, you are not alone. A sound came from the stairs, but this time not from above. Not from below. Beside him, the young keeper raised his head. At the far end of the room, within the shadow cast by the lamp, a figure stood. It was not sharply defined, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The slope of the shoulders, the slight tilt of the head, the way one hand rested behind the back. The old keeper. You're late, the figure said, repeating the same words. But this time there was no reproach in his voice, only observation. Time works differently here, the young keeper replied. He was surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. Sometimes early, sometimes late. The old keeper stepped slightly out of the shadows. His face sharpened into view. His eyes were deep, tired, but not empty. "Do you remember?" he asked. The young keeper nodded. "In fragments." "That's enough," the old keeper said. "Remembering everything is dangerous." At that moment, other figures appeared inside the lighthouse. Near the walls, in the stairwell, behind the lamp. They were of different ages. Some young, some very old, but they all stood the same way. "Keepers, we were not here at the same time," the old keeper said. "But here, we stand at the same time." The young keeper swallowed. "Are you dead?" he asked. The old keeper smiled. It was neither yes nor no. "Time," he said, "is not linear inside this lighthouse. The sea bends it, the light stabilizes it, and we exist in between." The notebook's pages shifted again. This time, pages from the past layered over one another. Dates flowed into each other. 1851, 1879, 1891. One date was missing, unwritten, not yet. This lighthouse, the old keeper said, was not built to be a signal when it was first raised. "Then what was it built for?" the young keeper asked. "To be an anchor," the old keeper replied, "so the sea would not forget." The walls trembled. A low resonance rose from below. The sea seemed displeased with the conversation. "The light," the old keeper continued. "If it is too regular, it calls. If it is too erratic, it angers. That is why keepers are needed, not machines." The young keeper understood. This lighthouse could not be automated. That was why it was alone. Why there was always only one keeper. Why there was a notebook. "I don't want to leave," the young keeper said. "But I don't want to disappear either." The old keeper nodded. "The first true sentence," he said. "Now comes the real question." The light turned. 11 seconds of light. 13 seconds of shadow. This time, the shadow did not cling to the walls. It pooled on the floor. Like water, the surface of the darkness rippled. "Are you ready?" the old keeper asked. "For what?" "For time to answer you for the first time." An image rose from the shadow. The young keeper saw himself, but older, seated in the chair, the notebook in his hands, and written inside it were the words, "A new one is coming." The young keeper held his breath. "Is this fate?" he asked. The old keeper did not answer. Instead, he gestured toward the mechanism beside the lamp. "This," he said, "is only a possibility." A sound rose from the sea. Not a scream, not a roar. A vibration that almost resembled a word. "Choose." The light continued to turn. And for the first time, the young keeper reached toward the mechanism not to change the rhythm, but to understand why he would change it. When his hand neared the mechanism, time paused, truly paused. The light continued its motion, but that motion no longer advanced. It hung suspended, like a gesture frozen mid-meaning. The shadow hung the same way, neither expanding nor retreating. The sea was silent. No hum, no wind, as if the world had drawn a breath and was waiting for his decision. For the first time, the young keeper felt he was not alone. Behind him, the figures, the former keepers, did not move, but their presence was heavy. Their memories rested on his shoulders. Each had touched this mechanism on a different night, asked the same question, and answered it in their own way. "If I change this," the young keeper said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what happens?" The old keeper stepped forward from the shadows. His face was half lit now, its lines deepened. "Time," he said, "breaks. But not every break is destruction." The young keeper examined the mechanism more closely. He noticed markings he had never seen before, fine scratches carved into the metal. Not numbers, not letters, marks of rhythm. Some had been worn away, others etched over, as if someone had tried to undo an earlier decision. "Who made these?" he asked. "We did," the old keeper said, "at different times, for different outcomes." The young keeper took a deep breath. The notebook lay on the table. It closed itself, as if writing was no longer required. This moment existed beyond words. He did not pull the small lever. Instead, he loosened the locking pin that restrained it, something the lighthouse service had always forbidden. Altering the rhythm was permitted. Releasing it was something else entirely. The light flickered. 11 seconds of light. 13 seconds of shadow. Then, the rhythm dissolved. The light remained still. So did the shadow. Neither brightness nor darkness. An in-between state. A sound rose from the sea. Not anger this time, but confusion. The sea had lost the rhythm. It could no longer receive the call. It could no longer answer. "What did you do?" the old keeper asked, his voice sharp for the first time. "I stopped listening," the young keeper said, and started speaking. The lighthouse walls creaked. The stones did not shift, but tension traveled through them. Time inside the lighthouse began to pull in different directions. For a moment, the young keeper felt himself in several places at once. Sitting in the chair, descending the stairs, kneeling beside the water in the lower chamber, all layered together. One of the oldest keepers stepped forward. His face was nearly erased by age. "We haven't tried this before," he said. "Or we did and forgot." An image rose from the sea this time, not from shadow, but from water, from a surface mixed with light. There were no ships, no people, only the sea, endless, deep, but calm. And for the first time, it was not watching. When the young keeper realized this, his chest tightened. The sea was no longer observing the lighthouse. The light was no longer a signal, not a command, not a call, just a light. "Is this good?" the young keeper asked. The old keeper did not answer, because the answer was not something that could be spoken. Time resumed its flow. The light began turning again, but now without a measurable rhythm. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes pausing. The shadow followed, not obediently, but like a dance. The figures, the former keepers, began to fade one by one. Some looked satisfied, some afraid, some relieved. The old keeper remained last. "Will you remember this?" he asked. The young keeper nodded. "Not everything," he said, "but enough." The old keeper smiled. "That's new," he said, "and it's good." Then he, too, vanished. The lighthouse grew quiet. The sea was calm, truly calm. The young keeper sat down. He opened the notebook. For the first time, he saw a blank page. The ink did not move on its own. The pen did not tremble. He wrote in his own hand. "Seventh night. I release the rhythm. The sea listens, but it does not watch." He closed the page. When morning came, the first fisherman passing the coast saw the lighthouse light. But it was different now. Softer, less commanding. It guided, but it did not summon. The fisherman could not explain it. He only thought, "This light feels right." The young keeper looked out at the horizon. It was clear, no fog, and for the first time, a thought appeared in his mind that had not been written in the notebook. Perhaps this lighthouse no longer needed a single keeper. Perhaps time had finally learned. The young keeper remained seated in the chair. Time was moving again, but not in its old order. He could no longer hear the progression of hours. Instead, there was an expanding present inside the lighthouse. Moments did not stack or chase one another. They simply existed. This state did not frighten him. On the contrary, it brought a sense of openness he had not felt in a long time. He opened the notebook again. The pages no longer turned on their own. The ink did not flow. Words did not appear. For the first time, the notebook was silent. This silence was not a refusal. It was a surrender. He looked toward the stairwell. The shadow was still there, but it was formless now. It neither climbed nor descended. It seemed to be searching for nothing, as if the call it had been waiting for never came, and now it did not know what to do. The young keeper stood and walked toward the stairs. He did not count his steps. Counting no longer mattered. He went down. When he reached the lower door, he hesitated. The door was still there, but the scratches on it had faded. What once looked like fingernail marks were now nothing more than the wear of old wood. He opened the door. The lower chamber had changed. The water was still there, but its surface was no longer bright. Its depth could not be sensed. It did not reflect light, nor did it consume it. It simply existed. There were no reflections within it. No faces. No ships. No shadows. "Is it over?" the young keeper asked. His voice vanished without echo. No answer came, and for the first time, that did not trouble him. When he returned upstairs, the lighthouse looked different. The same stone, the same lens, the same mechanism, but the bond between them felt looser. The lighthouse was no longer locked into a single purpose. The light had ceased to be a function. It had become a presence. As the night progressed, he noticed small changes at sea. A boat appeared in the distance. It saw the light, adjusted its course, and passed. No fog rose. No low hum followed. The sea remained unresponsive. At first, this silence was unsettling. Then it made sense. The sea was no longer answering. And perhaps, for the first time, that was a good thing. Near dawn, he found a page in the notebook he had never seen before. It had been tucked between others. The paper was thicker than the rest. There was no date, only a single sentence, written in faded but legible ink. When the cycle breaks, what remains is responsibility. The young keeper returned the page to its place. He walked to the window. Dawn was breaking on the horizon. Colors spread in gentle transitions. Nothing abrupt, nothing dramatic. Just natural. In that moment, he understood. Time had not been fully repaired. The sea had not fallen completely silent. The lighthouse was not entirely free, but none of it was inevitable anymore. This was not a broken fate. It was a rewritten agreement. The young keeper returned to the chair. He closed the notebook, but did not lock it. He set the pen on the table. He looked once more at the mechanism. He did not touch it. The light was turning, as it wished. The final night did not begin any differently from the others. There was no wind. The sea was calm. The sky was clear. The lighthouse light turned in its irregular rhythm, no longer familiar in the old way, but familiar now. It did not call. It did not warn. It simply existed. The young keeper sat in the chair. The notebook was closed. For the first time, he did not feel its absence. Everything he needed was already there, in the stone, in the glass, in the light. And yet, something was missing. He recognized the feeling, the kind the others had known as well. The hollow left before a cycle truly closes. The weight of a price not yet paid. A sound rose from the sea. This time it was not a roar, nor a whisper, not a summons. It felt more like a reminder, as if the sea were saying, "Now it's your turn." The young keeper stood. He stepped toward the mechanism. He no longer feared it. He placed his hand on it. For the first time, the metal was not cold. "I released the light," he said quietly, "but you're still holding me." The sea did not answer. Instead, the lighthouse changed. The shadows along the walls reshaped themselves, but not as a threat, as memory. Figures appeared, the former keepers, all of them silent, all of them watching. The old keeper appeared last. "The cycle is broken," he said, "but nothing is without cost." The young keeper nodded. "I know. What remains?" the old keeper asked. The young keeper looked out at the sea through the window. The reflection of the light lay across the water like a thin line. "A witness," he said. "Someone must remain, but no longer forever." The old keeper smiled. "You're the first to say that." The sea stirred, only slightly, like a breath being drawn. From below came a sound. The water in the lower chamber was moving. The door had opened. The young keeper began to descend. The lower chamber was no longer dark. The water level had receded. At the center of the room, on the stone floor, something rested. The old lighthouse lamp. Its glass was cracked, its metal worn, but inside it, a faint glow still lingered. The old keeper spoke. This light does not call you, but it asks something of you. What does it ask? The young keeper said. To remember, the old keeper replied, but only what is necessary. The young keeper lifted the lamp. It was surprisingly light. He lowered it into the water. The water did not swallow it. The light inside did not spread. It simply went out. In that moment, the main light above also stopped. But darkness did not fall. The sky brightened. It was not dawn, and yet the sea seemed to find its own light. The horizon sharpened. The water no longer looked like a vast emptiness, but like a path. The figures, the former keepers, faded one by one. The old keeper remained last. There's no need for the notebook anymore, he said, but someone must remember. The young keeper nodded. I will remember, he said, but I won't write it down. The old keeper vanished. The lighthouse was silent, but it was not empty. Days later, when the supply ship returned, the lighthouse was lit. But it was different. The light was steady, soft. Sailors saw it, but they did not stop. They continued on their way. The young keeper stood in the doorway and watched them go. He was no longer alone, but he was no longer bound. The lighthouse had ceased to be a signal. It had become a balance, and the sea had finally learned how to sleep.